Weakness in the Chinese economy, exacerbated by the ongoing trade dispute with the U.S., is fueling speculation that Beijing will act to stimulate the economy and prevent a further slowdown in China's growth. A major fiscal stimulus is seen by some as a bearish signal for the yuan, as China would be digging in its heels for a prolonged trade war with the U.S. The Chinese currency is flirting with the psychologically significant level of 7 yuan to the US dollar as the country's export sector takes a hit. The yuan has recovered somewhat in early November on suggestions from U.S. President Donald Trump that progress has been made toward a resolution, but many have dismissed this as electioneering ahead of the November 6 midterms in the U.S., rather than a sign of true progress. At 6 yuan and 94 fen to the dollar on November 8, the currency is significantly weaker than the 2018 high of 6 yuan and 27 fen in April, before the U.S. applied tariffs to imports of Chinese goods. The yuan has lost more than 10% of its value since its 2018 high in April. Source: Associated Press. We see some scope for a deal that accepts Chinese commitments to protect intellectual property and increase market access, wrote Laurent Clavel, head of macroeconomic research at AXA Investment Management, in a November 5 note. However, most China watchers anticipate that the U.S. main economic rival will not give ground so readily, making a protracted standoff between the economic heavyweights likely. Currently, the U.S. applies tariffs of 10% on imports of about $200 billion of Chinese goods, but these are set to rise to 25% in 2019, which Iris Pang, a Greater China economist at ING, believes will result in the yuan weakening to 7.30 to the dollar by the end of 2019. Xi Jinping's message implies that the chances of getting a positive result from a trade negotiation between China and the U.S. are small, Pang wrote. That means that the possibility of the trade war escalating and continuing to drag on the Chinese economy is high. Chinese stimulus. Chinese economic growth is slowing. The annualized 6.5% achieved in the third quarter was the slowest since the first quarter of 2009 amid the grip of the financial crisis. The government has been responding by lifting fiscal spending since June, although the total remains fairly modest, according to Pictet Wealth Management, with the fiscal deficit as of the third quarter equivalent to 3.4% of China's nominal GDP. The authorities have also been tinkering with taxes, raising individuals' monthly tax-free income threshold to 5,000 yuan from 3,500 yuan to boost household spending. AXA's Clavel said the state was likely to go further with tax cuts, fee reductions and export tax rebates. As growth headwinds persist or even stiffen, the authorities will have to come up with new tools to support the economy. But some investors expect a more dramatic intervention to bolster the economy. ING's Peng is forecasting fiscal stimulus of between 9 and 10 trillion yuan pouring into infrastructure spending, funded by local government financial vehicles. We expect banks will lend to projects that are operated by state-owned enterprises. We believe that private enterprises may be involved in some of the smaller projects, she wrote in a November 1 note. Yet the huge off-balance sheet debt burden of local governments means authorities will be wary of further infrastructure spending, according to Craig Botham, an emerging markets economist at asset manager Schroders. I do expect some stimulus, but I'm not convinced it needs to be huge, or can be, he said, suggesting instead central government tax cuts and a small amount of support from infrastructure spending and monetary easing. More like 1% to 2% of GDP than 10%. State support for the yuan. China has also been keen to slow the drop in value of its currency, at least partly to avoid an accusation of manipulation by the U.S. Chinese foreign reserves fell $34 billion in October, likely reflecting efforts by the authorities to shore up its currency by buying yuan. While $34 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to the remaining $3.053 trillion of reserves, it still represents the biggest monthly fall in 2018 so far. The country also saw non-resident portfolio equity outflows in October for the first time in almost 3 years. Against a backdrop of China trade and growth jitters, foreign investors pulled $12.3 billion from emerging market Asian equity markets, distributed broadly throughout the region, the Institute of International Finance noted in its October capital flows tracker. Botham said the yuan will likely continue to weaken, even as the dollar loses strength. There are lots of negatives for the currency now. Not just trade but also the structural shift away from large current account surpluses, the liquidity injections expected, and interest rate differentials, he noted.